The phone rang at 4:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember the exact time because I was standing in my living room by the bay window, watching the tide come in, holding my favorite coffee mug, the one with the chipped handle that my husband Vincent gave me on our 30th anniversary. It has a faded picture of a seashell on it and the words, "Home is where the waves are." I've drunk my morning coffee from that mug for 11 years now. I was holding it when my whole world tilted sideways. My son's name flashed on the screen. I smiled. He doesn't call often anymore, maybe once every few weeks, and usually it's short, distracted, like he's checking something off a list. But still, a mother's heart lifts when her child's name appears, doesn't it? I answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart." His voice was casual, too casual, the kind of casual that has something hard hiding underneath it. "Mom, I have some news. You're leaving tomorrow. Your beach house has already been sold. Bye." I didn't say anything at first. I thought maybe I'd misheard him. Maybe there was static on the line. Maybe this was some kind of joke I didn't understand. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "What did you just say?" He sighed like I was being difficult. "The house, Mom. We sold it. The new owners take possession at the end of the week. Vanessa found you a really nice apartment in Charlotte. It's a senior community. There are activities. You'll make friends. It's better this way. You're rattling around in that big place all by yourself. It's not safe." My hand started trembling. Coffee sloshed over the rim of my mug and burned my fingers, but I barely felt it. "You sold my house," I repeated. The words didn't make sense in my mouth. "The house I've lived in for 30 years. The house your father and I built together." "Mom, don't be dramatic. It's just a house, and honestly, it's too much for you to handle alone. We're doing you a favor." I could hear his wife in the background, saying something I couldn't quite make out. Her voice had that bright, sharp edge it always has when she's gotten what she wanted. "You forgot something important," I said quietly. He laughed, actually laughed. "Like what, Mom?" And that's when I went silent. Because the house he thought he'd sold was the one I had planned to leave him in my will. The home his father and I had poured our hearts into for 3 decades. The inheritance I'd been protecting for him, saving for him, dreaming he would bring his own children to someday. He had tried to steal it out from under me while I was still living in it, and he had no idea that I already knew. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to take a deep breath with me. Just one slow breath, in and out. And please, if you're listening right now, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. It brings me so much comfort to know that women all over the world are hearing this, that I'm not just talking into the dark, that I'm not alone. If stories like this speak to you, if you've ever felt invisible or dismissed, or like your own family was treating you like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved, please subscribe to Jessica Stories Vault. We walk this road together here. Now let me go back to the beginning. Let me tell you who I am and how I got to that phone call. My name is Eleanor, and my story matters. I'm 68 years old. For 43 years, I was married to the love of my life, a man named Vincent who made me laugh every single day, even when I was angry at him, even when life was hard. We met when I was 23 and he was 25 at a library fundraiser in Ohio. I was a librarian. He was pretending to be interested in books so he could talk to me. It took him 3 weeks to admit he hadn't read anything longer than a newspaper since high school. By then, I was already in love with him. We moved to North Carolina when our son was 2 years old. Vincent had gotten a job offer he couldn't refuse, and I followed him without hesitation. That's what you did back then. That's what I thought love meant. Following, supporting, building something together. We found this beach house when it was nothing but potential and problems. Rotting porch, leaking roof, windows that rattled when the wind blew. But it had a view of the Atlantic Ocean that made my heart ache, and Vincent looked at me and said, "We can make this into something beautiful, together." And we did. 30 years of repainting shutters and replacing floorboards, and hosting Christmas dinners, and watching our son grow up and leave and come back and leave again. 30 years of coffee on that wraparound porch, watching the sun rise over the water. When Vincent died 4 years ago, A heart attack, sudden, no warning. I thought I might die too. Not from grief, exactly, but from the feeling that half of me had been ripped away without permission. But I didn't die. I kept waking up. I kept drinking my coffee from that chipped mug. I kept walking the beach at sunrise, talking to Vincent in my head, telling him about my day like he was still sitting in his chair on the porch. My son was attentive at first, called every Sunday, visited on holidays, helped me sort through his father's things, even though I could tell it hurt him. But somewhere along the way, things shifted. The calls got shorter, the visits got rarer, and his wife started saying things that made my stomach tighten. Such a big house for one person, don't you think? Have you thought about what's practical now that you're on your own? The market is so hot right now, you could get a fortune for this place. I smiled and changed the subject, every time, because I told myself she meant well, because I told myself my son would never let anyone pressure me. Because I was a mother, and mothers want to believe the best about their children, even when the evidence is stacking up against them. That was my blind spot. That was the thing I couldn't see until it was almost too late. I loved my son so much that I made excuses for him. I explained away the distance in his voice. I rationalized the way he stopped asking how I was doing and started asking about the house. I convinced myself that he was just busy, just stressed, just going through a hard time with work or marriage or life. I didn't want to see what was really happening, but the truth doesn't care what you want. It comes for you anyway. About 18 months before that phone call, something happened that planted the first seed of doubt in my heart. My neighbor Thomas, a retired attorney who had been friends with Vincent for decades, mentioned that a real estate appraiser had been asking questions around the neighborhood. Specifically about my property. Specifically about what it might be worth. When I asked my son about it, he laughed it off. Said he'd mentioned to a colleague that his mother owned beachfront property, and the guy must have gotten curious. I believed him, but I didn't forget. 3 weeks later, I intercepted an envelope in my mailbox. It was addressed to my son at my address, which was strange because he hadn't lived here in nearly 20 years. Inside was a market analysis for my property. Professional, detailed, estimating the value at nearly $2 million. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, holding those papers, feeling something cold settle into my chest. But I still didn't want to believe it. I still made excuses. Maybe he was just curious. Maybe he was planning something nice, some kind of investment advice he wanted to surprise me with. I told myself 100 stories that weren't true because the true story was too painful to accept. Have you ever done that? Have you ever known something in your gut, something your body was trying to tell you, but your heart just couldn't hear it? If you have, I understand. I understand completely. Looking back, I can see all the signs I missed. The way my daughter-in-law's eyes would sweep over my furniture like she was already redecorating. The way my son would steer conversations toward my plans for the future with a little too much interest. The way they both talked about me like I was a project to be managed instead of a person to be consulted. But I was lonely. I was grieving. And I wanted so badly to believe that my family still loved me the way I loved them. That mug with the chipped handle? I was holding it the day I found the papers. I was holding it the day I made the phone call that changed everything. And I was holding it the day my son told me he'd sold my home out from under me. It's just a mug. Just ceramic and faded paint and a handle that should have broken off years ago. But every time I look at it, I remember who I was before I learned the truth. And I remember who I became after. My son laughed when I told him he'd forgotten something important. He had no idea what was coming, and honestly, neither did I. Not yet, but I was about to find out exactly what I was capable of when the person I loved most in this world tried to erase me from my own life. After my son hung up, I stood in my kitchen for what felt like hours. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. The tide outside had come all the way in and started going back out again. The light through the windows shifted from afternoon gold to that soft gray that comes just before sunset. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I just stood there, replaying his words in my head, trying to find some other meaning in them. Some explanation that would make sense. You're leaving tomorrow. "Your beach house has already been sold." He'd said it like he was telling me the weather, like he was checking off an item on a list. Like I was an item on a list. My hands were shaking when I finally set the mug down on the counter. I missed the edge, and it fell to the floor with a crack that made me jump. The handle broke clean off. That chipped, fragile handle that had somehow survived 11 years of daily use. I picked up both pieces and held them in my palm, looking at the break. Clean. Final. Like something that had been weakened for a long time had finally given way. That's when I started to cry. Not big, dramatic sobs. Just quiet tears that slid down my cheeks while I stood there in my kitchen, holding the broken pieces of something I loved. I cried for Vincent. I cried for the son I thought I'd raised. I cried for the future I'd imagined, grandchildren running through these rooms, family dinners on the porch, growing old surrounded by people who loved me. But mostly, I cried because I'd seen this coming. Deep down, in that quiet place where women keep the truths they're not ready to face, I'd known something was wrong for months, maybe years, and I'd done nothing. I'd smiled and changed the subject and told myself I was imagining things. I'd let my love for my son blind me to who he was becoming. If you've ever loved someone so much that you couldn't see them clearly, you know exactly what I mean. Love is supposed to be a gift, but sometimes it becomes a blindfold. We wear it willingly because the alternative, seeing the truth, hurts too much. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on my porch wrapped in the old quilt my mother had made, watching the moon trace a silver path across the water, and I let myself remember things I've been trying to forget. The Christmas 3 years ago when my son and his wife had given me a gift card to a home organization service. "To help you declutter," Vanessa had said with that bright smile. "Simplify your life." At the time, I'd thanked them and tucked it in a drawer. Now I understood what they'd really been saying. Start getting rid of your things. You won't be here much longer. The Thanksgiving when they'd brought a real estate agent friend to dinner without telling me. "She just loves coastal properties," my son had explained when I asked why a stranger was at my table. "I thought you two might hit it off." The woman had spent the whole meal asking questions about my house. How many bedrooms? When was the roof last replaced? Did I have any water damage from hurricanes? The birthday when they'd given me a framed photo of the three of us, but the frame was from my own living room. They'd taken a picture off my wall, replaced the photo inside, and wrapped it up like a gift. Such small things, such easy things to explain away. But sitting there in the dark, I finally let myself see the pattern. They'd been circling my house for years, like vultures, waiting for something to die. And the something they were waiting for was me. The next morning, I called my sister Ruth. Ruth is 5 years younger than me, sharper than a box of tacks, and the only person in my life who had never trusted Vanessa. "There's something off about that woman," she'd said at the wedding 12 years ago. "She looks at people like she's calculating their net worth." I told her she was being unfair. I defended my daughter-in-law for years, made excuses for her coldness, explained away her comments about money and property and inheritance. Ruth had never said, "I told you so," but she'd also never stopped watching. When I told her what my son had said on the phone, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. Don't leave anything out." So I did. I told her about the real estate appraiser, about the market analysis that arrived at my address with my son's name on it, about the years of comments and questions and that strange feeling I'd had, that feeling of being managed instead of loved. Ruth listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "We need to find out exactly what they've done, legally I mean, before they do anything else." She knew an attorney, a woman named Gloria, who specialized in elder law, who had helped Ruth's friend when her own children tried something similar. "These things happen more than you'd think," Ruth said. "Adult children who decide their parents' assets belong to them, who convince themselves they're owed something." I felt sick hearing those words. My son, my only child, the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the teenager I'd worried about, the young man I'd put through college. How had we gotten here? I made an appointment with Gloria for the following week. In the meantime, Ruth suggested I request copies of any documents related to my property from the county recorder's office. Just to see if anything's been filed without your knowledge, she said. Probably nothing, but better to check. I did what she suggested. I drove to the county office on a gray Thursday morning, feeling foolish and paranoid, telling myself I was overreacting. The clerk was a young woman with kind eyes who didn't ask why I wanted the records. She just printed them out and handed them over with a sympathetic smile, like she'd seen this before. I sat in my car in the parking lot and opened the folder, and there it was. Someone had filed paperwork attempting to establish my son as a co-owner of my property through something called a quitclaim deed. The signature on the document was supposed to be mine, but it wasn't my handwriting, not even close. My son had forged my signature, or had someone forge it for him. He tried to make himself part owner of my home without my knowledge or consent. The filing had been rejected. The notary stamp was outdated, some technical error that stopped it from going through, but the intent was unmistakable. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes, holding the evidence of my son's betrayal, watching people come and go from the county building like it was any normal day. But it wasn't a normal day. It was the day I stopped making excuses. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment when you finally saw something you'd been refusing to see, and everything shifted? I'd love to know in the comments, have you ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they'd been working against you the whole time? How did you find out? How did it change you? When I finally drove home, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't call my son and confront him. Instead, I did something I'd never done before in my life. I started keeping records. I made copies of everything. I took photos of the forged signature next to samples of my real handwriting. I started a folder on my computer where I saved every email, every text, every piece of evidence. Gloria had told me on the phone that if I wanted to protect myself, I needed to document everything. Don't confront them yet, she said. Don't let them know what you know. Just watch and write it all down. So that's what I did. For the next few months, I became a detective in my own life. Every time my son called, I took notes afterward. Every time my daughter-in-law made a comment about the house, I wrote it down. Every time something felt wrong, a question that was too specific, a suggestion that felt like pressure, I added it to my file. It was exhausting, it was heartbreaking, and it was necessary. Because I was starting to understand something important. My son and his wife weren't going to stop. The rejected deed was just their first attempt. They would try again, probably more carefully next time. And I needed to be ready. I met with Gloria 3 weeks after I found the forged documents. Her office was in a quiet building downtown, all soft lighting and comfortable chairs and framed diplomas on the walls. She looked at my evidence for a long time without speaking. The good news, she finally said, is that the forged deed didn't go through. Legally, the house is still entirely in your name. I exhaled. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. The bad news is that this shows clear intent. Your son wanted to gain ownership of your property without your consent. And based on what you've told me about the phone call, he's now claiming to have sold it, which means he's either lying to pressure you into leaving, or he's found a buyer and created fraudulent paperwork. She looked at me with kind, serious eyes. Either way, you need to protect yourself. I spent the next hour with Gloria, going over my options. I learned about power of attorney, about healthcare proxies, about the ways adult children can take control of their parents' lives if the proper safeguards aren't in place. And I learned about wills. You told me you'd plan to leave the beach house to your son, Gloria said carefully. Is that still what you want? I thought about the forged signature. I thought about that phone call. I thought about years of being managed and pressured and treated like a problem to be solved. No, I said, it's not. We spent another hour rewriting my estate plan. I removed my son from everything. I named my sister Ruth as my power of attorney and healthcare proxy. And I left my beach house, the home Vincent and I had built together, the home that was supposed to be my son's inheritance, to a charitable trust. The local library system where I'd worked for 28 years. The food pantry where I volunteered. Places that had given me purpose when I felt purposeless. Places that would use my home for good. When I signed the new documents, my hand was steady. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vengeful. I was just done. Done making excuses. Done being invisible. Done giving my love to people who saw it as weakness. But I wasn't ready to confront my son. Not yet. Because some part of me still hoped I was wrong. Some part of me wanted to give him one more chance to show me that the man I'd raised was still in there somewhere, buried under whatever greed or pressure or dysfunction had taken hold of him. So I waited. I watched. And I prepared. If you're still here with me, I want you to know something. This story isn't about revenge. It's not about destroying my son or punishing him or making him suffer. It's about finally learning to protect myself. After 68 years of putting everyone else first, my husband, my child, my students, my community, I finally asked myself a question I'd never asked before. What do I need? What do I deserve? And the answer was simple. I deserved to be safe in my own home. I deserved to make my own decisions. I deserved to be treated like a person, not a bank account or a problem or an obstacle in someone else's plans. If that sounds obvious to you, I'm glad. It should be obvious. But for women like me, women who were raised to be accommodating, to keep the peace, to put family first no matter what, it wasn't obvious at all. It was revolutionary. 3 months after I signed those new documents, my son called with that cold announcement. You're leaving tomorrow. Your beach house has already been sold. And I finally understood why I'd been preparing all those months. Why I'd been documenting and watching and waiting. Because when the moment came, I was ready. My son had tried to steal my home. My son had forged my signature. My son had sold something he didn't own to people who believed his lies. And he had no idea at all, that I'd seen every move he made. No idea that the house he thought he'd stolen was never his to take. No idea that when his buyer's lawyer started digging into the paperwork, the whole thing was going to fall apart. But I knew, and I wasn't going to tell him. Not yet. I was going to let him discover the truth the same way I had, slowly, painfully, with all his lies collapsing around him. Sometimes the quietest justice is the most devastating, and my justice was just beginning. For 3 days after that phone call, I didn't leave my house. I moved through my rooms like a ghost, touching things. The door frame Vincent had fixed after a hurricane. The window seat where I used to read while our son played on the beach. The kitchen table where we'd shared 1,000 meals as a family. I was saying goodbye. Not because I was leaving, I wasn't going anywhere, but because something had ended. The family I thought I had. The son I thought I'd raised. The future I'd imagined. All of it was gone now, and I needed to grieve it before I could move forward. On the 3rd morning, I woke up before dawn. I made my coffee in the old percolator, the same one Vincent and I had bought at a garage sale in 1989, and I carried my mug out to the porch. The mug with the broken handle. I'd glued it back together the day after it fell, but the crack was still visible. A thin line running through the ceramic, a reminder of what had almost shattered. I held it carefully as I watched the sunrise paint the water pink and gold and orange. And I talked to Vincent the way I always do. I miss you, I said out loud. I miss you every single day. But I need you to know I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. I finally figured out how to protect myself. A pelican dove into the waves, came up with a fish, and flew off toward the horizon. Life going on, the way it always does. That afternoon my phone rang. It was my daughter-in-law. I stared at her name on the screen for a long moment before I answered. My heart was pounding, but my voice came out calm. "Hello, Vanessa." "Mom!" Her voice was bright, too bright, dripping with false sweetness. "I've been so worried about you. We called to tell you the good news about the house. And then we didn't hear back. Is everything okay?" I almost laughed. The good news, like selling my home out from under me, was some kind of gift. "I've been thinking things over," I said carefully. Oh, wonderful. I knew you'd come around. The apartment we found is really lovely. It has a balcony and everything. There's bingo on Tuesdays and a shuttle to the grocery store. You're going to love it. She was already planning my life, already imagining me in that apartment, grateful and compliant, while she and my son counted the money from my house. When were you thinking I would move? I asked. Since the house is apparently sold and all. Well, the new owners want to take possession by Friday, so we were thinking, maybe tomorrow? Derek can rent a truck, and we'll come down to help you pack. We'll have you settled in Charlotte by the weekend. Tomorrow. They wanted me out of my home in less than 48 hours. That's very generous of you, I said, keeping my voice even. Just one question. Of course, anything. Who signed the sale paperwork? Silence. I'm sorry? Vanessa's voice had lost some of its brightness. The sale paperwork. For my house. Who signed it? Because I'm looking at my own signature right now, and I don't remember signing anything. More silence, longer this time. I'm not sure what you mean. Derek handled all the details. You should talk to him. I'd love to talk to him, but first, I'd love to see the deed, the one with my signature on it. Can you send me a copy? I don't have access to those documents. Derek. Then have Derek send them to me, today, before anyone starts packing anything. I could hear her breathing change, faster now, less controlled. Mom, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe we should all sit down together and... There's no misunderstanding, Vanessa. My house is in my name, only my name. I never signed anything transferring ownership or authorizing a sale. So either there's been a terrible mistake or someone committed fraud. Either way, I'm not going anywhere. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but something else was happening too. Something that felt like strength. For the first time in years, I had spoken the truth out loud. I had stopped pretending. I had stopped accommodating. I had said no. And it felt terrifying and wonderful and right all at the same time. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment when you finally said the thing you'd been holding inside, and it changed everything. I'd love to hear about it. Tell me in the comments. When was the first time you stopped making excuses for someone who was hurting you? What gave you the courage? 2 hours after I hung up on Vanessa, my son called. He wasn't laughing this time. Mom, what the hell is going on? Vanessa said you accused us of fraud. That's insane. You're confused. You signed those papers months ago, don't you remember? I came down with the notary and everything. No, you didn't. Mom, I've never signed any papers transferring my house to you or anyone else. I have copies of every document filed with the county. I know about the quitclaim deed. I know about the forged signature. Dead silence. I also know that the filing was rejected because of a problem with the notary stamp. So whatever sale you think you made, whatever money you think you're getting, it's not going to happen because you never owned this house. You never had any right to sell it. I could hear him breathing, heavy, angry. Mom, I don't know what you think you know, but you're making a huge mistake. The buyers have already paid a deposit. If this falls through, then you'll have to give them their money back. That's not my problem. I didn't take their deposit. You did. Based on paperwork you knew was fraudulent. I didn't. He stopped, started again. Listen to me. You're 68 years old. You're living alone in a house that's too big for you. You're clearly confused about what you signed and when. I'm trying to help you. Are you? Yes. God, Mom. Why do you have to make everything so difficult? I'm your son. I'm looking out for your best interests. By selling my home without my knowledge? By forging my signature? By telling me I'm leaving tomorrow like I'm a tenant being evicted? That's not. By treating me like I'm senile when I catch you in a lie? Mom, I'm not confused. I'm not difficult, and I'm not going anywhere. I hung up again, and then I sat down on my porch and cried. Not because I was scared, not because I was unsure, but because my son, my only child, my baby, the person I loved more than anyone in the world, had just tried to gaslight me. He'd looked at my legitimate concerns about fraud and called me confused. He'd taken my boundaries and called me difficult. He'd chosen his lies over our relationship, and that broke something in me that I don't think will ever fully heal. The next few days were chaos. My son called 5 more times. I didn't answer. Vanessa called twice. I didn't answer. They left voicemails that started angry and gradually became pleading. "Mom, we need to talk about this." "There's been a misunderstanding. Let me explain. The buyers are threatening legal action. This is a disaster. Please call me back." I saved every voicemail, added them to my file. Gloria had told me to document everything, so that's what I did. On Friday, the day the new owners were supposed to take possession of my house, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe the screen. "Hello? Mrs. Russo? This is Jonathan Hartley. I'm the attorney representing Marcus and Ellen Chen, the couple who believed they were purchasing your property." My stomach dropped. "Yes? I'm calling because we've encountered some irregularities with the sale paperwork, specifically with the deed and the signatures authorizing the transfer." "I'm aware of the irregularities," I said carefully. "I never signed any documents authorizing a sale of my property. Any paperwork showing otherwise is fraudulent." A long pause. "I see. That's what we were afraid of. What happens now?" "Well, Mrs. Russo, my clients paid a substantial deposit to your son based on his representation that he had legal authority to sell the property. If that representation was false, and it appears it was, then my clients have been defrauded. They'll be seeking return of their deposit and potentially additional damages." I thought about my son, about the money he must have already spent, about the plans he and Vanessa must have made for my house, my equity, my life savings. "I'm sorry for your clients," I said. "They don't deserve what happened to them, but I'm not the one who took their money. I'm not the one who lied." "I understand. We'll be pursuing this with your son directly." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and stared at the wall for a long time. This was real. This was happening. My son was going to face consequences for what he'd done. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me felt sick. And part of me, a small, stubborn part that I couldn't quite silence, still wished none of it was true. Still wished I would wake up and discover this was all a nightmare. Still wished my son was the man I'd raised him to be, not the man he'd become. But wishes don't change reality, and the reality was that my son had tried to steal my home, and now the truth was coming out. Over the next week, I pieced together what had happened from my lawyer, from the buyer's attorney, and from the few things my son said in his increasingly desperate voicemails. He'd found a buyer for the beach house, a couple from Raleigh who'd been looking for a vacation property. He'd represented himself as having authority to sell, produced forged documents, and collected a deposit of over $100,000. The deposit was gone. Spent, probably, on whatever he and Vanessa had been planning to do with my money. When the sale fell through, the buyers demanded their money back. My son didn't have it. He was going to have to take out loans, maybe against his own house, to repay what he'd stolen. And there was talk of legal action. The buyer's attorney mentioned pressing charges. Gloria told me I could pursue criminal fraud charges too, if I wanted. I didn't want to. I know that probably sounds crazy after everything he'd done. But he was still my son. He was still the baby I'd rocked to sleep, the boy who'd scraped his knee learning to ride a bike, the young man who'd cried at his father's funeral. I couldn't send my own child to jail. I just couldn't. But I could protect myself, and I could let the natural consequences of his choices unfold. He would have to repay the deposit. He would have to explain to his wife why their scheme had fallen apart. He would have to live with knowing that his mother knew exactly what he'd tried to do. And he would have to live without me. That was the hardest decision I made during all of this. Not the will, not the legal protections, but the decision to step back from my son, to stop calling, stop trying, stop hoping he would become the person I wanted him to be. I told Gloria to send him a letter. It was simple, just a few paragraphs. It said that I loved him, that I always would, that he was welcome to contact me if he ever wanted to have an honest conversation about what had happened and why. But it also said that I could no longer trust him with my property, my finances, or my future. That I had removed him from my legal documents, and that until he was ready to take responsibility for his actions, I needed distance. I cried when I signed that letter, but I signed it anyway. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their choices, even when it breaks your heart, even when you wish you could save them from themselves. That was the hardest lesson of my life, and I was just beginning to understand how much it would change me. 3 weeks after I sent that letter, my son and daughter-in-law stopped calling. The silence was sudden and absolute. No more voicemails. No more texts with half-hearted apologies. No more attempts to explain or justify or minimize what they'd done. Just silence. At first, I told myself it was temporary, that he needed time to process, that eventually he would reach out, maybe not to apologize, but at least to talk, to acknowledge what had happened between us. But days turned into weeks, and the silence continued. And slowly I began to understand. This was their answer. This was how they were choosing to respond to being caught. Not with remorse, not with honesty, but with erasure. If they couldn't have my house, they didn't want me at all. I won't lie to you, that realization nearly destroyed me. There were mornings I couldn't get out of bed. Afternoons I sat on my porch staring at the ocean without seeing it, my coffee going cold in that glued-together mug. Nights I lay awake, replaying every moment of my son's childhood, searching for the point where I'd gone wrong, the place where I'd failed him. Because surely this was my fault somehow. Surely if I'd been a better mother, a stronger mother, a different kind of mother, he wouldn't have turned out like this. My sister Ruth called me every day during those weeks. She would talk about nothing, her garden, her neighbor's new dog, a recipe she'd tried that turned out terrible. She knew I wasn't really listening. She didn't care. She just wanted me to hear another human voice that wasn't my own thoughts. On one of those calls, about a month after the letter, I finally broke down. I don't know how to do this, I told her. I don't know how to be a mother to a child who doesn't want me. I don't know how to love someone from this far away. Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I'll never forget. You're not loving him from far away, sweetie. You're loving yourself up close for the first time in your life. That's not the same thing. I cried. Hard, ugly crying that came from somewhere deep in my chest. Somewhere I'd been keeping all the grief and confusion and betrayal locked up tight. When I finally stopped, Ruth was still there on the other end of the line. You did the right thing, she said softly. You protected yourself. You set boundaries. You told the truth. Those are all acts of love, not just for him, but for yourself. And I'm so proud of you. I think that was the first time anyone had said they were proud of me for choosing myself instead of sacrificing myself. It felt strange and wrong and absolutely necessary all at the same time. Have you ever had to choose yourself over someone you loved? Have you ever set a boundary that felt like abandonment, even though you knew it was survival? If you have, I want you to know, I see you. I understand, and you're not selfish. You're not cruel. You're just finally learning that you matter too. Around this time, I started volunteering more at the food pantry. I'd been going once a week for years, but now I went 3 times a week, sometimes 4. I needed something to fill the space where my family used to be. I needed to feel useful, needed, part of something larger than my own grief. There was a woman there named Caroline who worked the morning shift with me. She was about my age, maybe a little younger. With silver hair she wore in a long braid down her back and laugh lines around her eyes that suggested she'd earned every one of them. We worked side by side for 2 weeks before she said anything personal. Then one morning, while we were sorting canned goods, she said quietly, "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 4 years." I stopped sorting and looked at her. She didn't meet my eyes, just kept stacking cans of soup, her movements careful and methodical. I set a boundary she didn't like, Caroline continued. I told her I couldn't keep lending her money. I told her she needed to figure out her own financial problems. She called me selfish, said a real mother would help, and then she just stopped calling, stopped visiting, kept my grandchildren away from me like I was dangerous. My throat tightened. I'm so sorry. Don't be. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were sad but clear. I spent 2 years trying to fix it, apologizing for things I didn't do wrong, begging for contact, making myself smaller and smaller, trying to fit back into her life. What changed? I realized I was teaching her that boundaries don't matter, that if she punished me long enough, I would cave, that my needs were less important than her wants. She smiled, and it was the saddest, strongest smile I'd ever seen. So I stopped. I sent her one last letter saying I loved her and I would always be here if she wanted a relationship, and then I let go. Does it get easier? Some days. Other days it feels like my heart is being ripped out all over again. She touched my arm gently. But I can breathe now. I can sleep. I'm not constantly walking on eggshells or making myself sick with anxiety. And that's worth something. That's worth everything, actually. We went back to sorting cans, but something had shifted. I wasn't alone. There were other women out there who'd made the same impossible choice, who'd chosen their own dignity over their children's approval, and they'd survived. They were surviving right now, right next to me, stacking soup and beans and choosing themselves one quiet day at a time. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took out my old watercolor set, the one Vincent had given me for my 50th birthday, the one I'd promised myself I'd use more and then never did. I sat up on my porch with a cup of tea and watched the sunset, and I tried to paint what I was seeing. It came out terrible. The colors were muddy, the proportions were wrong. The ocean looked more like a puddle, and the sky looked like it was on fire in a bad way. But I didn't care. For 2 hours, I wasn't thinking about my son. I wasn't replaying conversations or imagining different outcomes. I was just mixing colors and moving a brush across paper and watching something emerge that hadn't existed before. It felt like breathing after being underwater for a very long time. I started painting every evening. Sunrises, mostly, because those were my favorite. That quiet moment when the sky shifts from dark to light, when everything feels possible again, when the world gets a second chance. Some of the paintings were still terrible, but slowly they started to get better. Or maybe I just stopped caring whether they were good and started enjoying the process. Either way, it was healing something in me I didn't know was broken. About 6 weeks after the letter, I got a call from the buyer's attorney again. Mrs. Russo, I wanted to let you know that we've reached a settlement with your son. He's agreed to repay the full deposit plus interest. It'll be in installments. He doesn't have the full amount available, but my client's satisfied with the arrangement. That's good, I said. I'm glad they're getting their money back. There's one more thing, he paused. Your son asked me to convey a message to you. He said to tell you that this was all a misunderstanding and that he never meant to hurt you. I was quiet for a moment. A misunderstanding? That's what he was calling it? Not fraud, not betrayal, not attempted theft. A misunderstanding. Like I'd somehow misinterpreted his forged signature and his announcement that he'd sold my house and his demands that I leave within 24 hours. Thank you for letting me know, I said evenly, but I won't be responding. After I hung up, I sat with that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to call him, wanted to yell at him for minimizing what he'd done, wanted to demand a real apology, real accountability, real acknowledgement of the harm he'd caused. But I didn't, because I was finally learning something important. I couldn't make my son see the truth. I couldn't force him to feel remorse. I couldn't change him or fix him or make him into the person I wished he was. All I could do was protect myself and grieve the relationship we didn't have. That evening, I called Ruth. He said it was a misunderstanding, I told her. She snorted. Of course he did. Taking responsibility would require him to look at himself honestly. It's easier to pretend you're just confused. I don't think he's ever going to apologize. Not really. Probably not. So what do I do with that? Ruth was quiet for a moment. You accepted. You accept that you raised a man, who is choosing to lie to himself and everyone around him rather than face what he's done. You accept that you can't save him from that choice, and you accept that your life, your real, actual life, is happening right now, with or without his participation. That sounds impossibly hard. It is, but you know what's harder? Spending the rest of your life waiting for him to become someone he's not, putting your own healing on hold until he gives you permission to move forward. That's harder. That's the thing that will actually kill you. She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing something and doing something are two very different things. I started writing letters to my son that I never sent. I would sit at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a notebook, and I would write down everything I wished I could say to him. All the hurt and anger and disappointment and grief. All the memories of who he used to be and the questions about who he'd become. I filled an entire notebook in 2 months. And then I took that notebook down to the beach one morning at sunrise, and I burned it. Page by page, I fed my unsent letters to a small fire I'd built in the sand. I watched the smoke rise and disappear into the pink sky. I watched my words turn to ash. It felt like a ritual, like a release. Like finally letting go of the conversation I was never going to have. When the last page burned, I stood up and walked to the water's edge. The tide was coming in, cold and clear. I let the waves wash over my feet, and I said out loud to the ocean and the sky and Vincent's memory. I did my best. I loved him with everything I had, and I'm going to be okay anyway. And somewhere deep inside, I felt something shift. Not healing exactly, not yet, but the beginning of acceptance, the beginning of peace. I was learning to live with a grief that would never fully go away, learning to carry it without letting it crush me, learning that I could be heartbroken and whole at the same time. It wasn't the ending I'd wanted. It wasn't the family I'd dreamed of, but it was the truth. And I was finally strong enough to live in it. The next chapter of my life was starting, whether I was ready or not. And this time, I was going to write it myself. Fall came to the coast like a whisper. The tourists left. The beach grew quiet. The air turned crisp in the mornings, and I started wearing Vincent's old flannel shirt when I took my sunrise walks. The blue one he'd worn so many times it was soft as tissue paper. 3 months had passed since I'd sent that letter to my son. 3 months of silence. 3 months of learning to live in a smaller family, a quieter life. But also 3 months of something I hadn't expected. Freedom. I started saying yes to things I'd always put off. Ruth invited me to visit her in Ohio for a week, and instead of making excuses about needing to stay home in case my son called, I went. We spent 7 days drinking too much coffee and laughing about our childhood and visiting the library where we'd both learned to love books. Caroline from the food pantry invited me to join her book club. I said yes. We read everything from mystery novels to memoirs. And once a month, I sat in a circle of women I barely knew and talked about stories that weren't my own for a change. A woman from my old library job reached out about helping with a literacy program for adults. I said yes to that too. Once a week, I sat with people who were learning to read late in life, and I watched their faces light up when letters finally made sense, when words finally clicked into place. I was building a life, slowly, quietly, without my son's approval or participation, and it was good. But I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt, because every good thing that happened, every small joy, came with a shadow of grief. Every time I wanted to share something, a beautiful sunset, a funny moment, a small victory, my first instinct was still to call him. And then I'd remember, and the grief would wash over me all over again. Have you ever experienced that? That double-edged feeling of moving forward while part of you is still looking back? That constant tension between healing and hurting? I think that's what real grief looks like. Not the dramatic sobbing you see in movies, but this quiet ache that just becomes part of your daily life. You learn to carry it. You learn to keep going. But it never fully goes away. One afternoon in late October, I was at the food pantry sorting donations when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. but something, intuition maybe, or just curiosity, made me step outside and swipe the screen. Hello? Mom? My heart stopped. Actually stopped. It was my son's voice. But different, smaller, rougher around the edges. I'm here, I said quietly. He stopped, started again. I know you probably don't want to talk to me. I didn't say anything, I just waited. Vanessa left me. The words came out flat, factual, like he was reporting the weather. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. Even after everything, I didn't want him to hurt. She said it was my fault the house deal fell through. Said I'd promised her a beach house, and instead I'd bankrupted us. She took half of everything and moved back to her parents' place. I closed my eyes, leaned against the wall of the building, tried to find the right words. Are you okay? I finally asked. He laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound. Am I okay? No, Mom, I'm not okay. I'm alone. I'm in debt. I had to take out a second mortgage to pay back those people. My wife left me, and you won't talk to me. I'm talking to you right now. You know what I mean. I did know. He meant why wasn't I fixing this for him? Why wasn't I making it better? Why wasn't I telling him it was all going to be fine and offering to help and pretending none of this had happened? What do you want from me? I asked gently. He stopped. I could hear him breathing. I want things to go back to the way they were. Before Vanessa left? Before all of this, before everything got so complicated. You mean before I found out you tried to steal my house? Silence. Mom, I'm not trying to be cruel, I said. I'm trying to be honest. You want things to go back to the way they were, but the way they were was you lying to me, manipulating me, forging my signature and trying to sell my home while I was still living in it. That's what the way things were actually look like. I never meant to hurt you. But you did. You did hurt me. And you haven't once, not one single time, apologized for it. You've called it a misunderstanding. You've blamed Vanessa. You've made yourself the victim. But you haven't taken responsibility. More silence. Longer this time. I don't know how to fix this, he finally said, and his voice cracked. And just like that, I heard it. My little boy. The one who used to come to me when he'd broken something or messed up or gotten in trouble at school. The one who'd believed I could fix anything. Part of me wanted to tell him it was okay, that we could move past this, that I forgave him and we could start over. But I'd learned something over the past few months. I'd learned that forgiveness without accountability is just enabling, that reconciliation without honesty is just pretending. And I was done pretending. I don't know how to fix it either, I said softly. But I know it doesn't start with me pretending you didn't do what you did. It doesn't start with me making you feel better about choices that hurt me. It starts with you telling the truth, to yourself first, and then to me. What truth? That you tried to take something that wasn't yours. That you lied. That you treated me like an obstacle instead of a person. That you chose money and property over our relationship. I paused. Can you say that? Can you admit that out loud? The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Then, I have to go. Okay. I thought you should know. About Vanessa. Thank you for telling me. Mom? Yes? Do you still love me? The question broke my heart, because of course I still loved him. I would always love him. Love doesn't just turn off because someone hurts you. But love alone wasn't enough anymore. Not without respect, not without honesty, not without him being willing to look at what he'd done and why. I love you, I said. I always will. But I can't have a relationship with someone who won't tell me the truth. I can't keep being hurt by someone who refuses to acknowledge the harm they've caused. So that's it? You're just giving up on me? No, sweetheart. I'm giving you space to decide who you want to be. And I'm protecting myself while you figure it out." He hung up without saying goodbye. I stood outside the food pantry for a long time, phone still in my hand, tears running down my face. Caroline found me there. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just put her arm around my shoulders and stood with me until I could breathe normally again. "My son called," I finally said. "How was it?" "Hard, sad, honest, I think. More honest than we've been in years." "That's something." "Is it? It doesn't feel like progress. It feels like we're further apart than ever." Caroline squeezed my shoulder gently. "Sometimes getting further apart is what has to happen before you can come back together in a healthier way. Sometimes distance is the only thing that creates enough space for truth." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe this was all leading somewhere better. That someday my son would wake up and see clearly and we could rebuild something real. But I was learning not to live in someday. I was learning to live in today, in this moment, in the life I actually had, instead of the life I wished for. That evening, I painted. A storm was rolling in across the ocean. One of those fall storms that turns the water gray-green and makes the waves crash high and wild. I sat on my covered porch with my watercolors and tried to capture it. The power of it, the beauty of it, the way something could be dangerous and magnificent at the same time. For the first time, one of my paintings actually looked like what I was trying to paint. The colors were right, the movement was there. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I signed it in the corner, just my initials and the date, and I felt something like pride. I was creating something, building something, becoming something other than just someone's mother or someone's wife. I was becoming myself. A week after that phone call, I made a decision. I was going to stay in my beach house for as long as I wanted. But I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life waiting for my son to change. I was going to live fully, deliberately, joyfully, with or without his participation. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. I started walking the beach every morning with a group of other early risers, women and men who became familiar faces, then acquaintances, then friends. I said yes when Ruth suggested we take a trip to the mountains next spring. I even went on a date. Nothing serious, just coffee with a kind man named Thomas, who'd been my neighbor for years. The same Thomas who tipped me off about the real estate appraiser all those months ago. He'd lost his wife 3 years before I lost Vincent, and we spent 2 hours talking about grief and second chances, and what it means to build a life after loss. It wasn't romance. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But it was connection. It was possibility. It was a reminder that my life wasn't over just because one relationship had ended. I was 68 years old, and I was finally learning what I should have known all along. I was enough. Just me. Without needing to prove anything or earn anyone's approval or sacrifice myself to keep the peace. I was enough. And that realization, that quiet, revolutionary realization, changed everything. One night in early November, I sat on my porch wrapped in Vincent's flannel shirt, drinking tea from my glued-together mug, watching the stars come out over the ocean. And I realized I was happy. Not the uncomplicated happiness of someone whose life is perfect, but the deep, hard-won happiness of someone who's walked through fire and come out the other side still able to feel joy. I'd lost my son, at least for now, maybe forever, but I'd found myself. And that was worth something. That was worth everything. I picked up my phone and opened the voice recorder. I've been thinking about this for weeks, and tonight felt like the right time. "Hi, sweetheart," I said softly, talking to the son who wasn't there. "I don't know if you'll ever hear this. I don't know if I'll ever send it, but I need to say it anyway. I forgive you, not because you've apologized or changed or earned it, but because carrying anger is too heavy, and I'm choosing to put it down. I forgive you for the lies, for the forged signature, for treating me like a problem instead of a person, for choosing greed over love. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It doesn't mean I trust you with my life or my home or my heart anymore. It just means I'm not going to let what you did poison the rest of my days. I hope someday you'll do the work you need to do. I hope you'll learn to be honest with yourself and with the people who love you. I hope you'll become the man I always believed you could be. But if you don't, if you choose to keep lying, keep blaming, keep running from the truth, I want you to know that I'm going to be okay anyway. I'm painting sunrises, I'm making friends, I'm laughing and crying and living, and that's enough. I'm enough. I love you. I always will. And the door is open if you ever want to walk through it with truth and humility and real change. But I'm not waiting by the door anymore. I'm out here living, and it's beautiful. I stopped recording and saved the file with the date. Maybe I'd send it someday. Maybe I wouldn't. But saying it out loud, claiming my own peace, choosing my own life, that was the point. I was free. Not because everything was resolved, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for someone else to give me permission to be whole. The wind picked up, carrying the salt smell of the ocean. Somewhere in the darkness, waves were crashing against the shore, steady and eternal. And I sat there in the middle of my own life, holding my scarred mug, wrapped in my dead husband's shirt, surrounded by the home I'd fought to keep. And I was happy. Finally, truly, impossibly happy. It's been 18 months since that phone call. 18 months since my son tried to sell my house out from under me. 18 months since my life broke open and I had to rebuild it from scratch. I'm sitting on my porch right now, drinking my morning coffee from the same mug with the glued-together handle. The crack is still visible, a thin line running through the ceramic, a scar that tells a story. I could have replaced it by now, bought a new mug, perfect and whole, with no history. But I didn't want to. Because this mug reminds me every single day that broken things can still be beautiful. That things can crack and be repaired and still serve their purpose. That a visible scar doesn't mean something is ruined. Sometimes it just means something survived. The sun is just starting to rise over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold. I've painted this scene maybe 100 times now, and it's different every single morning. The light changes, the colors shift. No two sunrises are ever exactly the same. Kind of like no 2 days of healing are exactly the same either. Some days I wake up and I feel strong and whole and grateful for the life I've built. I paint and volunteer and have coffee with Caroline and laugh at my book club and feel genuinely happy. Other days I wake up and the first thing I think about is my son. I wonder where he is, how he's doing, whether he ever thinks about me. I wonder if he's changed. I wonder if I'll ever hear from him again. And the grief sits heavy in my chest like a stone. Both kinds of days are real. Both kinds of days are part of my story now. I've learned that healing isn't linear. It's not a straight path from broken to fixed. It's more like the tide, coming in and going out, advancing and retreating, constantly in motion. Some days the water is calm. Some days it's wild. But it's always there. Always moving, always changing. That's what my life looks like now, always changing, always moving forward even when it doesn't feel like it. Let me tell you what's happened since that last phone call with my son. He hasn't called again. Not once in 18 months. At first, I checked my phone constantly, jumped every time it rang, held my breath every time I saw an unknown number. But gradually, I stopped waiting. I stopped arranging my emotional life around the possibility that he might reach out. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he's still in Charlotte, still working the same job, living alone in a smaller place after the divorce settlement. Apparently, Vanessa remarried quickly, someone with money, someone who could give her the lifestyle she wanted. Part of me felt sad for my son when I heard that. Part of me felt vindicated. Mostly, I just felt distant. Like hearing about a stranger's life instead of my own child's. Is that terrible? I don't know. It's honest anyway. I did send him a card on his birthday. Just a simple one with a sunset on the front. Inside I wrote, "I'm thinking of you today. I hope you're well. I hope you're finding your way to truth and peace. The door is always open if you're ready to walk through it differently. Love, Mom." I didn't hear back. I didn't expect to. But I sent it anyway because I needed him to know that I haven't disappeared, haven't stopped loving him, haven't closed the door completely. I've just stopped standing in the doorway waiting for him to walk through. My relationship with Ruth has deepened in ways I never expected. She's not just my sister anymore. She's my best friend, my confidant, my safe place. We talk almost every day, sometimes about serious things, sometimes about absolutely nothing. She's planning to come stay with me for a month next winter, and I'm already preparing the guest room and planning all the things we'll do together. Ruth told me recently that watching me set boundaries with my son gave her the courage to set some boundaries of her own. She'd been letting her adult daughter guilt her into babysitting every weekend, even though it was exhausting her and leaving no time for her own life. I watched you choose yourself, Ruth said, and I realized I could do that too. I could say no. I could have my own life. It doesn't make me a bad mother or a bad grandmother. It just makes me a person with limits. That conversation made me cry. Happy tears, though, because if my pain could help someone else find their strength, then maybe it meant something. Maybe it wasn't wasted. The food pantry has become the center of my social life. Caroline and I work together 3 mornings a week now, and we've become genuine friends, close friends, the kind who can sit in comfortable silence or talk about the hardest things without judgment. She told me recently that her daughter reached out after 4 years of silence. They're taking it slow. Coffee once a month, brief phone calls, careful conversations that avoid the painful topics for now. I don't know if we'll ever be close again, Caroline said. But we're talking. That's something. That's more than I had. I'm happy for her, and maybe a tiny bit envious too, if I'm being honest, but mostly just happy. The literacy program has been one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. There's a woman named Maria who started the program barely able to read street signs. Last month, she read her first complete book. A simple chapter book, the kind you'd give to a 3rd grader. But when she finished the last page and looked up at me with tears in her eyes and said, "I did it. I read a whole book," I felt more proud than I felt about anything in years. This is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. Not managing my son's expectations or making myself smaller to keep the peace, but helping, creating, building something good in the world. My watercolors have gotten better too. I'm not going to pretend I'm some amazing artist. I'm not. But I've gotten good enough that people actually recognize what I'm trying to paint now. I gave one of my sunset paintings to the library as a donation for their fundraiser auction. It sold for $200. $200 for something I made with my own hands, something that came from my heart. I cried when they told me. Happy tears. I've started painting other things too, not just sunrises. I painted the view from Ruth's porch in Ohio. I painted Caroline's garden. I painted the food pantry on a busy morning, all bustling energy and helping hands. And last month, I painted something I'd been avoiding for a long time. A portrait from memory of my son as a little boy. 5 years old, maybe 6, building a sandcastle on the beach behind our house. The way he used to look at me like I hung the moon. The way he used to trust me completely. I don't know why I painted it. Maybe to remember who he was before everything got complicated. Maybe to grieve the relationship we used to have. Maybe just to remind myself that the good parts were real too, even if they're gone now. I hung that painting in my bedroom where I can see it, but where visitors won't ask questions about it. It's just for me, a private remembering, a private grieving. Thomas and I have been seeing each other regularly. Nothing official, nothing serious, just companionship. Coffee on Saturday mornings, walks on the beach, dinner once a week at the little seafood place in town. He makes me laugh, he listens when I talk. He doesn't try to fix anything or give advice unless I ask for it. He's just present, kind, steady. I'm not in love with him. I don't know if I'll ever be in love again. Vincent was the love of my life, and maybe you only get one of those. But I like Thomas. I enjoy his company. And I'm learning that companionship and affection and shared laughter are valuable things, even if they're not grand passion. I'm learning that there are many different ways to build a good life. Last week, I did something that felt both terrifying and necessary. I updated my will again. The beach house is still going to the charitable trust. That hasn't changed. But I added a provision. If my son reaches out before I die, if we rebuild our relationship in a meaningful way, if he shows genuine change and accountability, there's a small inheritance set aside for him, not the house, not the bulk of my estate, but enough to know that I never stopped hoping for him, never stopped loving him, never completely closed the door. Gloria, my attorney, raised her eyebrows when I explained what I wanted. "You don't owe him anything," she said gently. "Not after what he did." "I know, but this isn't about what I owe. It's about who I want to be. And I want to be someone who leaves room for redemption. For him, yes, but also for me. I need to believe that people can change, that relationships can heal, that it's never too late for truth and accountability and new beginnings. Maybe that's naive. Maybe I'm setting myself up for more disappointment. But the alternative, giving up hope entirely, closing my heart completely, deciding my son is beyond redemption, that feels like a kind of death. So I'm choosing hope. Careful hope. Boundaried hope. Hope that doesn't require me to sacrifice my safety or my peace. But hope nonetheless. If you're listening to this story, I want to ask you something. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It brings me so much comfort to know that women all over the world are hearing this, that my story is reaching people I'll never meet, that we're all connected by these experiences of love and loss and survival. And if this story touched your heart, if you saw yourself in any part of it, please give it a like so I know I'm not alone. Subscribe to Jessica's Stories Vault so you don't miss the next story I pour my heart into. Because these stories matter. Your stories matter. Our collective experience of being women who've had to choose ourselves, who've had to set boundaries with the people we love most, who've had to rebuild our lives from the ground up, that matters. If you've ever had to make a hard choice to protect yourself or your children, share what you're comfortable sharing in the comments. Your story might help another woman feel less crazy, less alone, less guilty for doing what she had to do to survive. We need each other. We need to know we're not the only ones struggling with these impossible decisions. So here's what I've learned through all of this. Here's what I want you to take away if you take away nothing else. You are allowed to protect yourself, even from people you love. You are allowed to set boundaries, even with family. You are allowed to say no, even to your own children. You are allowed to grieve relationships that are still technically alive but functionally dead. You are allowed to choose yourself without being selfish. You are allowed to heal at your own pace, in your own way, on your own timeline. And you are allowed to build a beautiful life, even when your heart is broken. Those things can coexist. Grief and joy, loss and hope, sadness and peace. You don't have to wait until everything is resolved to start living. You don't have to wait for apologies or closure or perfect endings. You can start right now, right where you are, with whatever pieces you have left, and you can build something beautiful. I did. I'm doing it every single day. Is my life perfect? No. Do I still have hard days? Absolutely. Do I still miss my son and wish things were different? Every single day. But I'm also happy. Genuinely, surprisingly, gratefully happy. I have friends. I have purpose. I have art and volunteering and sunrise walks and a home I fought to keep. I have Ruth and Caroline and Thomas and Maria and a whole community of people who see me and value me and love me for who I am, not for what I can give them. I have myself. Finally, after 68 years, I have myself. And that's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything. This morning, after I finish my coffee, I'm going to paint. There's a particular shade of pink that happens right at sunrise that I've been trying to capture for weeks, and I think I'm finally getting close. After that, I'm meeting Caroline at the food pantry. We have a big donation coming in from the grocery store, and we'll need all hands on deck. This afternoon, I'm having lunch with Thomas. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches on the beach. And tonight, I'm going to call Ruth, and we're going to laugh about something ridiculous and plan our mountain trip and just enjoy each other's company. It's a simple life, a quiet life. Not the life I planned, but it's mine. All mine. Built with my own hands, my own choices, my own strength. And it's beautiful. Before I go, I want to leave you with one last question. Which part of this story felt closest to your own life? Was it the betrayal? The discovery? The decision to protect yourself? The grief of loving someone from a distance? The slow rebuilding? Tell me, I really want to know. Because your story matters, your experience matters, you matter. Thank you for walking this road with me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I see you. I honor you. I'm grateful for you. Now go drink your coffee, take your deep breath, and remember, you are allowed to choose yourself. You're not just allowed, you're worthy of it. You always were.